In the late 18th century, the French economy was in shambles. France was in debt from irresponsible financing, and the people were hungry, only to be supported by the Third Estate, the lowest and largest group of people in the caste system of France, while those above them lived in the lap of luxury. The ruler of France, King Louis XVI, was therefore deeply unpopular, and in 1789 the people began to rebel, declaring themselves independent from the king and forming the National Assembly of France. 2 years later, they wrote the French Constitution of 1791, so different from the absolute rule of the previous monarchy and an example for many legal systems around the world to come. It highlighted the rights that belonged to the nation and provided people with freedoms and privacy they had never seen before. In the late 1780s, unrest was brewing in France. France was ruled by King Louis XVI, and he was investing too much money in the American Revolution, when they were already in debt from the 7 Years' War. Bankruptcy was spreading throughout the country, and people were starving. The society was split into 3 estates: the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else. The first and second estates, although the richest and most powerful, were exempt from taxes, living a posh life. In contrast, the Third Estate fed the country, doing all the work and paying all the taxes. On June 20th, 1789, the king called an emergency meeting at the Palace of Versailles, the convocation of the Estates General. Each class got only 1 vote, even though the Third Estate made up 98% of the population. Finally, the Third Estate had had enough. They decided that they didn't want their fate in the hands of those who already benefited from them, and so they broke off, creating the National Assembly of France. Some people from the upper classes joined as well. This did not sit well with King Louis XVI. He attempted to stop them from meeting by locking the doors of the assembly room. This infuriated the commoners even more, and they met in a public tennis court, pledging not to give up until they had made their own constitution. This was known as the Tennis Court Oath. The king let them assemble, but he sent troops to regulate them. On July 14th of 1789, the Bastille, which was a jail for political prisoners, was stormed. King Louis XVI had just fired his financial advisor for siding with the Third Estate, and people were afraid of being suppressed. The storming of the Bastille was a famous historical event, and it is generally viewed as when the political prisoners being held captive were freed, but in reality there were only 7 of them. The main focus of this action was to arm themselves with weapons they plundered. They were an unstoppable force. When the governor of the Bastille called for a ceasefire, he was decapitated and his head was mounted on a pike. Bastille Day is celebrated in France on July 14th every year to commemorate this event. The next big event came in August, just 1 month later. A document similar to our Declaration of Independence was written, namely, the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This document outlined the necessary things for ruling France. In October of 1790, rumor came around that Queen Marie Antoinette was hoarding grain in the Palace of Versailles where she lived. The result was a horde of armed women marching to their dwelling and forcing King Louis and her to go to Paris. They were sentenced to house arrest and later imprisonment. King Louis's anti-revolutionary beliefs were now common knowledge. It was said that he was being disrespectful to revolutionary symbols of France, like the National Assembly. In fear of further violence, nobility began to emigrate out of France. In 1791, King Louis and Marie Antoinette dressed as servants and tried to escape to one of their generals' property, but were soon found and brought back to Paris. The king and queen running away was frowned upon by a lot of society, but the Jacobins, the most radical group of them all, viewed this as an abdication of the throne. They decided to start a petition for a republic and collected signatures in a park called Champ de Mars. Troops from the National Assembly came in to manage the situation. To begin with, the troops just supervised the crowds, but when people started throwing rocks at them, the troops shot at the people, killing about 50 citizens. This was known as the Champ de Mars Massacre. When the French Constitution of 1791 was written, a new light was shed on the future. This constitution promised equal taxes for all, equal penalties for similar offenses, and an end to hereditary rights. One would be able to speak, write, print, and publish whatever he pleases without censorship. He could worship, sign petitions, and own property, not having to worry about government intervention. Those in charge would tend to the poor and provide education for the general welfare. Power was considered to be held by the nation, not any individual, including the king. A new political system, a constitutional monarchy, was established. In the National Assembly, the members who were voted on was to make the laws, only to be approved or vetoed by the king. Royalty was an exception, as it was still passed down through family. In certain situations, the powers of a king could even be revoked, demoting him to an average citizen. This led to the declaration of a republic 1 year later. At first, people were elated, but soon they lost faith because the new government was not solving their economic status or the vast hunger affecting the people. Another problem with the new constitution was that it failed to constrain people from murdering. Anti-revolutionary groups around France began killing those who opposed them, and government officials and other groups did the same at a much larger scale to their enemies. King Louis XVI was executed by the guillotine in 1793 because the National Assembly feared that other countries would attempt to put him back in power. The guillotine was the most popular way to kill someone during the French Revolution. Brought into action by Dr. Guillotine, this fearsome instrument was considered a more humane way to kill people. King Louis's last words were as follows: "I die innocent, I pardon my enemies, I only sanctioned upon compulsion the civil constitution of the clergy." The rest of his speech was not to be heard over the fanfare of horns and drums. After the execution, the air was pierced with triumphant shouts of "Vive la Revolution" and hats being thrown in celebration. Unfortunately, this event launched France into an era of mass death, increasing the ever-growing popularity of the guillotine. Much of this happened because of suspicions that someone was against the revolution, without any real proof. This was not only unjust, but also hypocritical, as it went against the clearly stated right to express their opinions, written in the French Constitution of 1791. In total, about 16,000 people lost their lives this way. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on the small island of Corsica in 1769. He hungered for glory, but his obvious talent was shoved aside for more profitable candidates higher up in the hierarchy. His opportunity came in 1789 with the beginning of the French Revolution. He used the people's enthusiasm to gain support. He fought many battles, rapidly gaining power and respect. He became a famous military general and a symbol of the revolution. In 1792, France declared war on Austria, and Prussia allied with Austria. The king had encouraged the Prussians in joining the war, and this was part of the reason he was imprisoned. The Declaration of Pillnitz and the Brunswick Manifesto pressed on the consciousness of the French. The Declaration of Pillnitz was the Austrian and Prussian leaders stating their disapproval of the revolution, and the Brunswick Manifesto was when the Duke of Brunswick declared that he was going to put King Louis XVI back in full power. In August of 1792, the National Assembly declared France a republic. When Napoleon defeated and made peace with the Austrians in the south, he sent money back to France, improving the economic situation. On the 9th of November 1799, Emmanuel Joseph Sayes proposed the idea of staging a coup to Napoleon, and he agreed. Sayes, Napoleon, and a man named Pierre Roger de Caux said that there was a Jacobin revolt to overthrow the government, and that they should go to the Château de Saint Cloud, a palace west of Paris, and surround themselves with Napoleon's army. After successfully trapping and dealing with the old government, Sayes, Napoleon, and de Caux wrote a new constitution, placing themselves in charge, but Napoleon ended up with the most power. He became the Emperor of France and drove the nation to a fate similar to that which they had had before. The time that followed included 6 costly wars, with Napoleon in the center. These events did not have the immediate impact they were intended to have, but the ideas were so radical that they lit a flame engulfing Europe and beyond in one revolutionary fire. These virtuous ideas came in the form of legal documents and protests, stating that rights belonged to the individual and loyalty to the nation. After Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo, royalty was restored to France by the other countries, but there were many changes. They had a written constitution, and rights and privileges were no longer kept from the commoners. There was an elected parliament, and the country's laws were unified. Their maxim, liberty, equality, fraternity, was inlaid in their newspapers, documents, speech, and way of thinking. In other countries, peasants began to revolt. For example, the French Revolution was a key influencer for the Haitian Revolution, the first slave revolt ending in success. The French Revolution made many people consider the questions of racial equality, women's rights, and religious freedom. These topics and the fight for liberty are still relevant in teachings today. French laws were organized and an example for legal systems and modern politics across the world. For example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written in 1948, was modeled after the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen, written in 1789. The French Revolution questioned good and evil and altered the way we think about society and life today.